Mark Smith, a self-made millionaire and the CEO of a thriving tech company, had always prided himself on his control over his life. His wealth, his business, and his success were the result of years of hard work, calculated decisions, and strategic planning. He had built everything from the ground up, and every aspect of his existence was precisely managed. For years, he had told himself that his ambition and single-minded focus on his career were all that mattered. He didn't need family. He didn't need relationships. All he needed was success. It was his life's mission, and everything else was secondary. He had no time for distractions, no time for anything that didn't contribute to his goals. But one ordinary afternoon, everything began to change. It started with a simple errand. Mark was on his way out of his office building, heading to his car. The sun was low in the sky, casting a warm golden hue across the streets of the city. Mark was in his usual mode, focused on his next meeting and the work he still had to do. His thoughts were entirely consumed by business, when out of nowhere, a small figure darted across his path. Before Mark even had time to react, the figure, a little girl, ran up to him, snatched his wallet from his coat pocket, and sprinted away. It happened so quickly that Mark didn't even realize what had happened until he saw her running into the crowd. His reflexes kicked in immediately, and without a second thought, he took off after her, ignoring everything else in his path. He pushed past pedestrians and dodged obstacles as he tried to catch up. He wasn't about to let some child steal from him, no matter how fast or how small she was. But the girl was quick, and despite his long legs, he couldn't close the gap between them. As the chase continued, Mark's frustration grew. He was used to being in control of everything, but this was different. He had no control over the situation. The girl was unpredictable, weaving in and out of the crowd, and Mark was beginning to feel like he would never catch up. Just when he thought he might lose her, she darted into an alley. Mark was close now, just a few steps behind. He was almost there. Finally, with one last burst of energy, he reached out and grabbed her by the arm. She spun around, her wide brown eyes looking up at him, startled but not frightened. Mark's breathing was heavy, and his heart pounded in his chest. His fingers tightened around her wrist as he stood over her, trying to catch his breath. "Why did you take my wallet?" he asked, trying to sound calm, though there was no hiding the edge of anger in his voice. The girl looked at him for a long moment, her small face filled with a strange mix of confusion and fear. Then, in a quiet voice, she answered, I didn't mean to. I just needed it." Mark's frustration faltered, replaced by confusion. Needed it? For what? She didn't respond right away, and instead, she just stared at him, her eyes locked onto his with an intensity that unsettled him. It was as if she was searching for something in his face, something familiar. Mark tried to understand. Why had she stolen from him? What did she want with his wallet? Was she just another child caught up in desperate circumstances? I thought if I had money, I could," she began, her voice trailing off. Mark's mind was racing as he wondered what this was all about. Before he could press her further, she shifted the conversation in a way he never expected. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she said, her voice quiet but clear. Then she lifted her sleeve and revealed something that stopped Mark in his tracks. It was a small, faded birthmark on her left wrist, right where his own birthmark was, exactly the same. The same shape, the same color. It was like looking at a reflection of himself. Mark blinked in disbelief. The connection was undeniable, but it made no sense. How could this girl have the same birthmark as him? His mind whirled as he tried to process the impossible. He stared at her wrist, then back at her face. Could it be? Was it possible? For a moment, all he could do was stand there, unable to speak. The girl seemed to sense his confusion and pulled back slightly. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice small. "I just thought, maybe you could help me." Mark shook his head, the questions overwhelming him. What do you mean? How do you know? How do you know I have the same mark? His voice faltered as he struggled to understand the situation. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be real. It was too much. The girl hesitated before speaking again. My mom said I had your eyes, and your mark, but she never told me who you were. Her words hit him like a ton of bricks. Your mom. Mark repeated, the words not making sense. The only person he could think of who might have known him from years ago was someone he had long since lost touch with, someone who had always kept her distance from him. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but he wasn't ready to accept it. My mom is Catherine, she continued, her voice shaking slightly. She said you were my father. She said you'd know what to do. Mark's heart skipped a beat. Catherine. The name echoed in his mind, bringing back memories he had buried years ago. The brief relationship they had, the distance that had grown between them after he chose his career over everything else. He had never known she had a child. He had never known she had kept this secret from him. Suddenly, everything around him seemed to fade into the background. The noise, the crowd, the city, it all became a blur. The only thing that mattered now was the girl standing before him, holding his wallet. The same girl who, he now realized, was his daughter. How could he have missed this? How could he have never known? Mark sat in his office the following morning, the weight of the events from yesterday still pressing on him. He couldn't shake the image of the little girl with the same birthmark as him. He couldn't understand it. How had he not known? How could this be possible? His entire life, everything he had built, suddenly seemed insignificant. He had been so focused on his career, on maintaining control and success, that he had completely ignored the possibility that something as monumental as fatherhood could be waiting for him. He had to know more. He had to find the girl, and most importantly, he had to find Catherine. The mother of this child, the woman from his past, who had kept this secret from him for so many years. He didn't know what he expected, but the fact that this girl, his daughter, had appeared out of nowhere, had stolen his wallet and had made him question everything, was beyond his comprehension. Mark had always prided himself on his ability to handle any situation with logic and efficiency, but this was different. His mind was clouded with questions and emotions he couldn't control. He wasn't prepared for this. He wasn't ready to be a father. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that he had no choice now. This girl, this daughter, was a part of him. And he couldn't walk away from that. He spent the rest of the day in a daze, his thoughts constantly drifting back to the encounter. At one point, he tried to refocus on work, but the spreadsheets and emails in front of him seemed meaningless. He wasn't interested in deals or meetings. He wasn't interested in anything but understanding what had happened. The realization that he might have a child, someone he hadn't known about, someone he had never been there for, gnawed at him. By the time evening came, Mark had made up his mind. He needed to find Catherine. He needed answers. There was no other way forward. His assistant had already tracked down the girl's address, and Mark wasted no time. He left the office early, his mind still racing, and made his way to the address. The drive felt longer than it should have. He wasn't sure what he was going to say, or even if he would get any answers. Catherine had always been private, and the idea that she had kept this secret from him for so long made him feel like a fool. He wondered what her reasons had been. Did she think he wouldn't care? Did she think he wouldn't want to be involved? Was that why she kept him out of their lives? When he arrived at Catherine's house, Mark sat in the car for a few moments, gathering his thoughts. His hand rested on the steering wheel, his fingers gripping it tightly as if it could offer him some comfort. He had never been in a situation like this before. His heart was pounding in his chest. What was he going to do when he saw her? What was he going to say? He finally opened the car door and stepped out, walking up to the front door of the modest house. It was a simple home, nothing extravagant, but there was something about it that felt familiar. He had spent time here years ago, before everything had changed. Before his world had become about business and success, before he had lost touch with everything that really mattered. He knocked, and after a moment, Catherine opened the door. Her expression was guarded, but not surprised. She had known he would come eventually. Mark could see the years in her face, lines that had deepened, eyes that had grown tired. She had aged, but she was still the same woman he remembered. There was no denying the familiarity in her face, in the way she looked at him. "Mark," she said softly, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "I wasn't sure you'd show up." "I had to," he replied, his voice calm but firm. "I need answers. About the girl. About everything." Catherine stepped back, motioning for him to come in. As he crossed the threshold, the weight of the situation hit him. This wasn't a business meeting or a routine conversation. This was his past. This was his future. This was a conversation that could change everything. "Sit down," Catherine said, gesturing to the couch. "I know you have questions. I don't know where to begin." Mark sat, feeling the tension in the air. His mind was still racing, but he forced himself to focus on the woman in front of him. The woman who held the key to everything. "Why didn't you tell me?" Mark finally asked, his voice strained. "All these years. Why didn't you tell me I had a daughter?" Catherine looked at him, her eyes filled with emotion. She sighed deeply, as if the weight of the past few years was finally catching up to her. "I didn't know how to. You were always so focused on your career, Mark. I didn't think you'd want this. I didn't think you'd want me to tell you. I thought it would ruin your life." Mark shook his head, frustration bubbling up inside him. "You didn't think I'd want to know? You didn't think I'd want to be part of her life?" "I thought it would be better if you didn't know," Catherine replied softly. "I didn't want to disrupt everything you had. I didn't want to complicate your world." Mark's anger flared for a moment, but then it settled. He understood her fear, but it didn't make it any easier. "So you kept it a secret. You kept her from me." "I didn't know what else to do," Catherine whispered. "I was scared, Mark. I was scared of what you would say. Scared of how things would change." Mark took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. He had to understand her, even if he didn't agree with her choices. But the fact remained, he had a daughter. A daughter he knew nothing about, a daughter who had been kept from him all these years. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure, he couldn't turn away from her now. "I need to meet her," Mark said, his voice steady. "I need to meet Emily." Catherine looked at him, her eyes softening. "She's waiting for you. She's been asking about you." Mark nodded, standing up. "Let's go." As they walked toward the door, Mark's heart pounded in his chest. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he knew this was the moment that would change everything. This was his chance to meet the daughter he never knew he had. When Mark arrived at Catherine's house, he felt a heavy weight on his chest, something he couldn't explain. It had been years since he'd seen her, and yet, she still felt like a part of his past he couldn't shake. Catherine opened the door, her face not quite a smile, but more like a faint recognition of everything that had passed between them. She wasn't the same as he remembered her, of course. Time had softened her features, but there was a sadness in her eyes that spoke volumes about the years they hadn't shared. "Mark," she said quietly, her voice holding a trace of hesitation, "I wasn't sure you'd come." "I had to," Mark replied, the words coming out more clipped than he intended. He didn't want to explain everything in that moment. He just needed answers. "I need to know about Emily." Catherine stepped aside, allowing him into the modest living room. The house was cozy, nothing extravagant, but there was a warmth in the air that Mark had long since forgotten. He noticed the family photos on the walls, the kind of photos he never took, the ones that captured the essence of a life well lived outside of a boardroom. There was something unsettling about it, something that made him question all the decisions he had made. Catherine motioned to the couch, and he sat down, already feeling the weight of the conversation that was about to unfold. "She looks like you know," Catherine said after a moment, her voice distant, like she was preparing herself for what was next. "More than I ever imagined she would." Mark felt a tightening in his chest. He hadn't thought about it, he had been so caught up in the shock of it all, the surprise of finding out he had a child, that he hadn't stopped to think about what she might look like. But hearing Catherine say it out loud, hearing that Emily was so much like him, made it all feel real in a way that was both beautiful and terrifying. "How?" Mark asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "How did you keep this from me?" Catherine sighed, sitting across from him. Her hands twisted together nervously, and Mark could tell she was struggling with her words. "I didn't want to tell you. I didn't think you'd want her, not with the life you were building. You always made it clear how much your career mattered to you, and I didn't want to burden you. I thought she would be better off without you in her life." Mark ran a hand through his hair, frustration bubbling up inside of him. He had spent so much time pushing everything else aside to focus on success, on building his empire. But to hear Catherine say those words, to know that she had made the decision to raise Emily without him, felt like a betrayal he wasn't prepared for. His mind raced as he tried to process it all. "You didn't think I'd care." Mark's voice was quiet, but there was an edge to it. "I didn't know she existed. How could I care if I didn't even know?" Catherine met his gaze. There was no anger in her eyes, just a quiet sadness. "I didn't know what to expect from you, Mark. I didn't know if you'd want to be a father, if you'd even want to be involved. I was scared of how you'd react, of how it would change everything." Mark closed his eyes for a moment, trying to steady himself. He understood her fear. He understood that she had made the decision based on what she thought was best at the time. But the reality of it all, the sudden weight of fatherhood, hit him harder than he ever could have imagined. He had built his life around his work, around the control he had over his own destiny. But this was something he had never planned for. "I'm not ready for this," Mark admitted, his voice strained. "I've never been ready for something like this." "I know," Catherine said softly. "Neither of us were. But she's yours, Mark. She's your daughter, and she deserves to know you." Mark's heart pounded in his chest as he tried to wrap his head around the situation. He wasn't ready, he had never imagined himself in this role. But the truth was undeniable. He couldn't walk away from her, not now. He had to meet her. He had to see this girl who, despite everything, was a part of him. "I need to meet her," Mark said, his voice firm despite the uncertainty swirling inside him. "I need to understand this. I need to see her." Catherine nodded, her expression softening. "She's waiting for you. She's been asking about you, hoping you would come." Mark felt a surge of panic rush through him. What if he wasn't what she expected? What if he wasn't good enough? What if he couldn't do this? But despite all the doubts, despite the fear that gnawed at him, Mark knew there was no turning back. This was his chance. He wasn't going to walk away. Catherine led him down the hallway to a room at the back of the house. When she knocked, a small voice from inside called out, "Mom." "Is it him?" Mark's chest tightened. His palms were clammy as Catherine opened the door. Inside, sitting on a chair by the window, was a little girl, no older than 6 or 7, with brown hair and eyes that seemed to be searching for something, or someone. When she saw Mark standing in the doorway, her eyes widened, and she froze for a moment, unsure of what to do. He could see the curiosity in her eyes, but also the wariness, the caution of someone who had been hurt before. "Emily," Catherine said gently, "this is your father." "Mark." The word hit Mark like a ton of bricks. Father. It felt strange on his tongue, like something he wasn't ready for. But he stepped into the room, slowly, cautiously, as if testing the waters. "Hi, Emily," Mark said, his voice soft. She didn't say anything at first. She just stared at him, as if trying to decide whether he was real or just another person who would disappoint her. Mark couldn't blame her for being cautious. He had been absent for all her life. He had no right to expect anything from her. But when she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but clear. "Are you really my dad?" Mark felt a lump form in his throat. He nodded slowly. "I think so. I don't know what to say right now, but I'm here. And I'll try. I'll try to be your dad." The silence between them felt heavy, but it was a beginning. For the first time, Mark felt like he was doing something that mattered. And for the first time, he felt like maybe, just maybe, he could be the father Emily deserved. Mark spent the next few days in a state of disbelief. The reality of being a father, especially to a child he had never known, was a lot to absorb. He had always been in control of his life, always focused on his career, and the idea that he could just step into the role of a father seemed foreign to him. He had never thought much about family. He had never considered it a priority. But now, Emily, this little girl with his eyes, his birthmark, was in his life, and he had no idea what to do. He knew he couldn't just ignore her, couldn't pretend this didn't matter. She was a part of him, no matter how unprepared he felt. And yet, every time he thought about how to connect with her, his mind went blank. He had no experience with children, no idea what she needed, how to talk to her, or even how to be around her. The uncertainty weighed on him, but he had made a promise. He had promised Catherine, and he had promised Emily, that he would try. And try he would. The days that followed were filled with awkward silences, half-hearted attempts at conversation, and uncomfortable pauses. Emily seemed to shy away from him whenever he got too close, as if she wasn't sure whether to trust him or if she even wanted him in her life. And who could blame her? Mark had been absent for all these years. He had been a stranger to her, someone she had only heard about from her mother. He wasn't her father in any real sense. Not yet. He decided he needed to spend more time with her. He couldn't expect everything to be fixed overnight, but if he was going to have a chance at building a relationship with her, he had to take it one step at a time. He started with small gestures. He bought her a toy, something simple, just to get her attention, to show her that he was trying. He didn't know what else to do. He didn't know if it would work, but he had to start somewhere. The next afternoon, he went to Catherine's house again. When he arrived, Emily was in the living room, playing with her toys, though she didn't look up when he walked in. Catherine greeted him at the door with a small, understanding smile. She had seen the struggle in his eyes and knew how difficult it was for him. She had been where he was now, unsure of how to move forward, unsure of what to say. She had raised Emily alone for so long that she had forgotten what it was like to have someone else involved. "Hi, Emily," Mark said cautiously, approaching her slowly. She glanced up but didn't say anything, her small hands continuing to move the toy car across the floor. "I brought you something," he said, trying to sound casual, though his voice shook slightly. Emily paused, looking up at him with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. She hadn't expected him to bring her anything. She hadn't expected anything from him at all. Mark placed the small toy on the coffee table in front of her. "I thought you might like this," he said quietly. Emily stared at the toy for a moment, then looked back up at him. "What is it?" "It's a little puzzle," Mark said, feeling oddly nervous. "You put the pieces together to make something fun." She hesitated, her eyes flicking from the toy back to him, but after a moment, she reached forward and picked it up. "Thanks," she muttered, her voice small. Mark stood there, unsure of what to do next. Should he leave her alone to play? Should he try to talk to her? He watched as she carefully examined the puzzle pieces, her brow furrowed in concentration. Catherine stepped into the room and quietly placed a hand on Mark's shoulder. "You're doing fine," she said softly. "You don't have to rush anything. Mark nodded, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was failing. He had no idea how to approach this situation, how to truly connect with Emily. It felt like there was a wall between them, a barrier he couldn't break. It was as though she was waiting for something, waiting for him to prove that he was worthy of being her father. He stayed for a while, watching as Emily slowly started to work on the puzzle. She didn't speak much, but there was something about her quiet focus that made him feel like maybe he wasn't completely failing. At least he wasn't pushing her away. He wasn't forcing her into anything. Before he left, Mark knelt down next to her. "I know I'm not the father you expected," he said, his voice low and sincere. "But I want to try. I'll try to be here for you, Emily. I can't change what's happened, but I'm not going anywhere." Emily didn't respond at first, but then she looked up at him with a small, uncertain smile. "Okay," she whispered. Mark's heart swelled with a mixture of relief and hope. It wasn't much, but it was a start. It was more than he had expected. For the first time since he had found out he was a father, he felt like maybe, just maybe, this could work. That night, as he lay in bed, Mark reflected on the small breakthrough. He wasn't sure what the future held, or how he would be as a father, but he knew one thing for sure: he couldn't give up. Emily deserved better than that. She deserved a chance to have a real father, and even if it took time, he was willing to try. He wasn't sure what the next steps would be, but he knew that this was the beginning of something new. Something that, despite all his doubts, felt like it could be beautiful. Mark woke up the next morning with a sense of urgency in his chest. He had never felt this way before, not about anything outside of his business. He had spent most of his adult life focusing on his work, his company, his career, and the idea of being a father was something he had never seriously entertained. But now, with Emily in his life, everything had shifted. The weight of responsibility, the fear of not being good enough, the uncertainty of how to build a relationship with a child, it was overwhelming. After spending the previous day with her, Mark felt a mixture of hope and doubt. Emily had been quieter than usual, and while she had accepted his small gestures, it was clear she wasn't ready to fully trust him. She was still hesitant, unsure of who he really was or what he was offering her. Mark didn't blame her for it. After all, he had been absent for her entire life, and now he was trying to insert himself into it, expecting everything to fall into place. But it wouldn't be that easy. Nothing that was worth anything ever was. He got up early and decided to go to the office for a while, but his mind was still consumed by thoughts of Emily. He couldn't focus on work. His usual routine felt trivial in comparison to the monumental change in his life. Every time he tried to think about the tasks at hand, his thoughts kept drifting back to her, the little girl who looked so much like him, who was a part of him, yet felt so distant. He couldn't continue this way. He knew he needed to do something more, something that would break through the wall Emily had built. He couldn't just buy her toys and hope that would make everything right. He needed to show her that he was there for the long haul, that he was committed to being a part of her life, no matter how difficult or awkward it felt. That afternoon, he left the office early and went straight to Catherine's house. As he arrived, he noticed how much quieter everything seemed, how still the world felt. It was as though everything around him was waiting for him to take the next step. He wasn't sure what it would be, but he couldn't just sit back and wait for things to magically improve. He had to act. When Catherine opened the door, she looked at him with a mixture of hope and hesitation. She had been patient with him, but Mark could tell that she, too, was anxious about how things would go with Emily. He could feel the unspoken tension between them, the years of unresolved issues that they both had to confront. But right now, none of that mattered. What mattered was Emily. "Is she home?" Mark asked, his voice low and steady. Catherine nodded. "She's in the living room. She's been a little quiet today, but she's been okay." Mark took a deep breath and followed Catherine into the house. He could hear the soft sounds of Emily moving around in the other room. She was alone, and Mark wondered what she was thinking. He couldn't know for sure, but he had a feeling she was processing everything that had happened, the strange man who claimed to be her father, the sudden shift in her world. It had to be overwhelming for her. As Mark entered the living room, he saw Emily sitting on the couch, her legs curled up beneath her as she stared at the TV, though she wasn't really watching it. Her gaze seemed far away, as though she was lost in her own thoughts. When she saw Mark standing in the doorway, she didn't immediately react. She just looked at him, her eyes wary but not entirely dismissive. "Hey, Emily," Mark said gently, trying to sound as calm as possible. He didn't want to push her, but he also knew that silence wouldn't get him anywhere. Emily didn't respond right away, but after a moment, she shifted slightly and gave him a small nod. "Hi," she muttered, not looking him in the eye. Mark felt a pang of sadness in his chest. He had been expecting this, but it still hurt. She wasn't ready to accept him, not yet. And how could she? She had spent her whole life without him, and now he was asking her to believe that he could just be a father to her. It wasn't that simple. He sat down on the other side of the room, keeping some distance between them, not wanting to make her feel cornered. "I brought something for you," he said, his voice quiet but steady. Emily looked at him but didn't move. "What is it?" she asked, still not fully engaging. "It's just a little something," Mark replied. He reached into his bag and pulled out a small sketchbook and a set of colored pencils. "I thought maybe you'd like to draw. I know how much you like puzzles, so I thought this might be fun." At first, Emily just stared at the sketchbook, her expression unreadable. Then, after a long pause, she reached out and took it from his hands, her fingers brushing against his briefly. It wasn't much, but it felt like a small connection. Mark didn't push her to open it or do anything with it. He just let her hold it, let her make her own choice. "I used to draw when I was your age," Mark said, trying to keep the conversation light. "It helped me feel like I was in control of something, you know." Emily finally looked up at him, her brown eyes meeting his for a brief moment. There was something there, something small, but it was there. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was hope, but Mark didn't want to get ahead of himself. This wasn't going to be fixed overnight. "I don't really like drawing much," Emily said after a while, her voice small. "But I'll try." Mark smiled softly, his heart swelling just a little. "It wasn't much, but it was something. That's all I'm asking. You don't have to do anything you don't want to do. I just wanted to offer it." There was another long silence between them, but this time it wasn't as heavy. Emily opened the sketchbook, flipping through the pages without speaking. Mark stayed where he was, watching her, letting her have the space she needed. He didn't want to force her into anything, but he couldn't help but feel like this was a turning point. Maybe they weren't there yet, but they were getting closer. He could feel it. Catherine, who had been standing in the doorway, stepped into the room and smiled faintly. "It's good to see you both in the same room. It's progress." Mark nodded but didn't say anything. The silence wasn't uncomfortable now. It felt like the beginning of something, even if he couldn't define it yet. There was still a long way to go, but he felt something stir inside him. Something that made him believe they could get there. "Thanks, Catherine," Mark said softly. "I'll keep trying. I don't know what to do, but I'll keep showing up." Catherine didn't respond right away, but the look in her eyes told him that she understood. She had been through this with Emily before, but this was different for Mark. He was only just beginning to understand the complexities of fatherhood, and it scared him. But he wasn't backing away. Not this time. As he looked at Emily, sitting there with the sketchbook in her lap, he knew this was just the beginning. There was still so much to learn, but for the first time, Mark felt like he was on the right path. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. And that, he realized, was enough for now. The days following that quiet afternoon in Catherine's living room felt like they were both slipping by too quickly and dragging on forever. Mark spent most of his time at the office, trying to drown out the constant thoughts of Emily that lingered in the back of his mind. Every decision he made, every phone call he took, every email he replied to seemed less significant than the one question he couldn't shake: how could he be a father? How could he do this right? He hadn't realized how much of his life had been consumed by work, by the need to achieve, to build something that would last. Now, in the face of fatherhood, he was unsure how to even begin. His mind raced with all the things he didn't know, all the things he had ignored for so long. Every time he thought he had it figured out, he realized that he was still at square one. He didn't know how to connect with Emily, didn't know how to break through the walls she had built up. Every attempt, every word, every gesture felt like it fell short, and he wondered if she would ever see him as anything more than a stranger. One evening, after another long day of work, Mark found himself standing outside Catherine's house again, his hands clenched at his sides. His usual confidence had evaporated, replaced by uncertainty. He wasn't sure what he was hoping for, but he knew he had to try. He had to keep showing up, even if it felt like he wasn't making any progress. Catherine greeted him at the door with a tired smile, and without a word, she led him into the living room. Emily was sitting on the couch, her legs tucked underneath her as she quietly flipped through a book. She looked up when Mark entered, but instead of the usual cold stare, she simply offered him a small, cautious smile. It wasn't much, but for Mark, it felt like a small victory. "Hi, Emily," he said, his voice soft, careful not to scare her away. She nodded and returned her attention to the book, her fingers tracing the edges of the pages. Mark felt a pang of frustration, but he didn't let it show. He knew that he couldn't rush this. He couldn't force a connection with her. It would take time, patience, and trust. "I brought something for you," Mark said, his voice still tentative. He didn't want to overwhelm her, but he also didn't want to retreat into silence again. Emily looked up, her brow furrowing slightly. Mark held out a small box in his hands. It wasn't anything extravagant, just a simple toy, a little robot that he knew she had mentioned liking. She stared at it for a moment, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. But then, after a long pause, she reached out and took the box from him. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She didn't sound ungrateful, just unsure. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was progress, even if it didn't feel like it. Mark sat down next to her on the couch, not too close but close enough to show that he was there. He didn't want to invade her space, but he also didn't want to give up. He just needed her to know that he was trying, that he cared, even if he didn't know exactly how to show it. "I thought you might like it," he said softly, trying to keep the conversation light. "I remember how much fun I had with toys like that when I was younger." Emily didn't respond immediately. Instead, she opened the box and began to play with the toy, her fingers moving cautiously at first, as if testing it. Mark watched her, a small hope beginning to blossom in his chest. She hadn't pushed him away, and that in itself felt like a win. Catherine, who had been standing in the doorway, stepped into the room. She smiled faintly, as if she could see the quiet shift between Mark and Emily. She knew how difficult this was for both of them, how much of a struggle it was for Mark to open up and for Emily to accept him. She had seen the pain and hesitation in both of their eyes, but she also saw something else, the beginning of a connection. "I'm proud of you, Mark," Catherine said quietly. Her voice was soft, but there was a warmth to it that made Mark feel, for the first time in days, like he was doing something right. "It's small, but it's a step." Mark nodded, his eyes still on Emily. He wanted so much to be the father she needed, but he had to remind himself that it couldn't happen overnight. It wouldn't be easy, and there would be days when he felt like he was failing, but he had to keep showing up. He had to keep trying. As Emily began to smile at the toy, her focus fully on it now, Mark felt a surge of relief. It wasn't the breakthrough he had hoped for, but it was a start. She was beginning to open up, little by little. She was beginning to accept him, even if she wasn't quite ready to trust him completely. After a few moments, Emily looked up at him again, her eyes still cautious but warmer than before. "You're not so bad," she said with a small, shy grin. Mark felt a lump form in his throat. It wasn't much, but it was everything. It was a sign that she was beginning to accept him, that she was starting to let him in. "Thanks, Emily," he said softly, his heart full. "I'm going to keep trying. I promise." Emily didn't say anything more, but Mark didn't need her to. The small smile on her face was all the reassurance he needed. It wasn't going to be easy, and there would be setbacks along the way. But this moment, felt like a turning point. It felt like something real was beginning to take shape between them. Mark left that evening with a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead would be long and uncertain, but for the first time, he felt like he was on the right path. It wasn't about being perfect. It wasn't about getting everything right. It was about showing up, day after day, and proving that he was there for Emily, that he would keep trying, no matter how hard it got. And that, for now, was enough. The following weeks felt like a delicate dance, one step forward and two steps back. Mark had grown used to the strange blend of emotions that washed over him every day, a mixture of frustration, hope, and doubt. His attempts to connect with Emily had been slow, and though there were small moments where he could see her warming up to him, they still felt like fleeting victories. He had learned that building a relationship with her wasn't going to be a smooth process. It would take time, patience, and trust, things he wasn't used to having to build from scratch. There were moments when he questioned his own capability as a father. He had spent so many years running his company, making decisions, executing plans, and managing everything with efficiency and precision. But this was different. Being a father wasn't about strategy, it wasn't about deadlines and projections. It was about being there, showing up, and understanding that sometimes things didn't go as planned. Sometimes, there was no clear path to follow. Despite the ups and downs, Mark refused to give up. He couldn't. The more time he spent with Emily, the more he realized just how much he had missed out on. He hadn't been there for her all these years, and though she had a part of him, she was still a stranger. But the longer he stayed, the more he felt her beginning to soften. It wasn't just the small moments of acknowledgement, like the way she'd start a conversation or allow him to sit beside her while she did her homework. It was the way she looked at him now. Her eyes weren't as wary, and there was a quiet acceptance beginning to form. Mark didn't expect anything dramatic, but these subtle changes were enough to give him hope. One rainy afternoon, after a particularly difficult day at the office, Mark decided to spend time with Emily again. He didn't have a clear plan, but he knew that he couldn't keep waiting for the perfect moment to arrive. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that he just had to be present in her life, not as someone who could fix everything, but as someone who would show up no matter how challenging it got. When he arrived at Catherine's house, he found Emily sitting at the kitchen table, her head bent over a notebook as she scribbled something with a pencil. Mark walked in quietly, not wanting to disturb her. Emily didn't look up immediately, but there was a small shift in her posture when she heard him. He wasn't sure if she was expecting him, but there was no hesitation in her actions when she turned to face him. "Hey, Emily," he said, trying to keep his voice light, even though his heart was racing. He wasn't used to this, to being uncertain about the small interactions that should have been easy. "Hi," she replied, her voice soft but not dismissive. Mark took a breath and walked over to where she was sitting. He glanced at the notebook she was working on, but she quickly closed it, as though she wasn't ready to share what was on the page. He didn't push. "What are you working on?" he asked, his tone casual, hoping it would open the door for conversation without making her feel pressured. "Just some school stuff," she answered quietly. "Nothing important." Mark smiled and pulled out a chair, sitting down across from her. He didn't want to interrupt her routine, but he also didn't want to let the silence settle in. They had spent so much time in silence, in the uncomfortable space between them, and he knew that the only way to break that was to keep trying, to keep being there even when he didn't know what to say. "I know things have been strange," he said after a moment, trying to find the right words. "But I'm not going anywhere, Emily. I'll keep showing up." She looked at him then, her brown eyes meeting his, and for the first time, Mark saw something that made his chest tighten. It wasn't a full smile, but it was something close. It was like a flicker of hope, of recognition. She didn't say anything, but her gaze softened, and Mark felt a glimmer of progress. "Can I help with that?" Mark asked, motioning toward her notebook. "You know, if it's not too much trouble. I'm not great with school stuff, but I can try." Emily hesitated, her fingers lightly tapping on the edge of the notebook. "You're not bad at it," she said slowly, as if testing the waters. "But, you probably don't have to help. I'm almost done." Mark smiled at her, trying to keep things light. "I can still try. I'm really good at pretending I know what I'm doing." Her lips quirked up in the smallest of smiles. It was more than he had hoped for. It wasn't the grand breakthrough he had imagined, but it was enough. She had let down her guard, even if just a little. He wasn't sure how many small steps it would take before they could have the kind of relationship he wanted with her, but this was progress. They spent the next hour together, with Mark helping Emily with her homework in the most awkward way possible. He didn't know the answers to most of the questions, but that wasn't the point. The point was that they were there together, sharing space, even if they weren't always talking. And in the midst of their quiet time, he realized that this was what it meant to be a father. It wasn't about being perfect. It wasn't about always having the right words or the right answers. It was about showing up, about being present. When Catherine came in to check on them, she paused at the doorway, watching them for a moment. She didn't say anything, just smiled softly to herself, and then quietly left. Mark didn't notice, too focused on the small progress being made between him and Emily. When Emily finished her homework, she closed her notebook and looked at him, this time with a little more warmth in her gaze. "Thanks for sitting with me," she said, her voice quieter than usual but with a softness Mark hadn't heard before. "I'm glad I could," Mark replied, feeling a swell of emotion in his chest. It wasn't much, but it was something. A simple thank you. But to Mark, it was everything. As he left that evening, the rain had stopped, and the world felt a little quieter. He knew that things weren't fixed. They wouldn't be for a long time. But for the first time, he felt like he was on the right path. It wasn't about forcing things to happen. It wasn't about rushing. It was about being there, showing up, and letting things unfold in their own time. And that, Mark realized, was all he needed to do. For Emily. And for himself. Mark woke up to the sound of rain tapping softly against the window, a rhythmic reminder of the quiet moments he had been savoring with Emily over the past few weeks. It had been an unusual period, full of ups and downs, but it felt like something was shifting. Every day, the connection between him and Emily was becoming stronger, even if it was subtle. He had started to let go of his preconceived notions of what fatherhood should look like, and in doing so, he had started to build something real with her. Something that wasn't perfect, but something worth fighting for. The previous day, Emily had done something that took Mark by surprise. She had invited him to her school play, something small, something she had been nervous about, but she had wanted him there. For the first time, he felt like he wasn't an outsider in her life. She had looked at him during the play, a quiet but confident smile on her face, and Mark had realized that this was the first time he had been present in her world. The first time he wasn't a figure from her past but a part of her present. As he lay in bed that morning, the events of the night before kept replaying in his mind. Emily had asked him to stay for dinner after the play, and it had been a simple, almost normal evening. They had sat together at the table, eating quietly, but there was something different about it. Something real. They hadn't talked much about the past. They hadn't dissected the years that had been lost. Instead, they had just been together, and that, Mark realized, was enough for now. He wasn't sure what was coming next, but for the first time in a long time, he wasn't afraid of it. He had been so consumed by fear of failure, fear of not being good enough, that he had almost missed the beauty of what was unfolding before him. He was beginning to see Emily not as a challenge or a responsibility but as a person. She was his daughter, and while he still had so much to learn, he was learning it with her, one day at a time. That morning, he called Catherine to ask if he could spend the day with Emily. Catherine, as always, was supportive but cautious. She knew how hard Mark was trying, and she appreciated the effort, but she also understood that Emily needed time. She wasn't used to having someone in her life in the way that Mark was trying to be. There were still moments when Emily pulled back, when the walls she had built for years came up, and Mark understood that. He knew that this wasn't going to be a smooth journey. It was going to take time, and he was willing to give it all the time it needed. When he arrived at Catherine's house later that morning, he found Emily sitting on the couch, reading a book. It was a peaceful scene, and for a moment, Mark just stood there, watching her. She had always been so quiet, so guarded, but there was something different about her now. There was a softness in her demeanor, a slight vulnerability that Mark hadn't seen before. She looked up when she heard him enter, and without saying a word, she closed the book and set it aside. "Hi, Emily," Mark said, his voice gentle. He wasn't sure if she was ready to talk, but he didn't want to rush her. He had learned to take things slowly, to let her come to him when she was ready. "Hi," Emily replied, her voice a little quieter than usual. There was still a hint of hesitation in her tone, but it was less than it had been before. He could feel it. There was something shifting, something subtle, but it was there. Mark sat down next to her, but he didn't try to fill the silence with words. He had learned that sometimes, the best way to build a relationship was by just being present. By showing that he didn't need her to say anything, that he was just happy to be with her. After a few moments, Emily turned to him. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice still soft but steady. "Maybe we can do something together today. Like, something fun." Mark's heart skipped a beat. For the first time, she was suggesting something. She was reaching out to him, taking a step toward him, and it meant more than he could say. He smiled, his voice warm. "That sounds like a great idea. What do you want to do?" "I don't know, maybe we can go to the park. I like the swings." Mark grinned, feeling a surge of emotion. This was it. This was the moment he had been waiting for. "The swings it is," he said, standing up and offering his hand. Emily hesitated for a second, but then, with a small but genuine smile, she took it. They spent the rest of the morning at the park, the air fresh and cool from the rain. They walked around the playground, Mark gently pushing Emily on the swings, laughing as she picked up speed. It wasn't the grand, perfect day he had once imagined fatherhood to be, but it was real. It was theirs. And for Mark, it was everything. The sound of Emily's laughter, the way her eyes sparkled when she looked at him, it was all the proof he needed that they were building something important. It wasn't about being perfect. It wasn't about being the perfect father or having the perfect family. It was about being there. Being present. Showing up. As they sat on the bench afterward, catching their breath, Emily turned to him, her face glowing with the happiness of the day. "I'm glad you're here," she said quietly. Mark's heart swelled. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected her to say something like that. But it was all he needed. All the doubts, all the fears, all the moments of uncertainty he had experienced over the past few months faded into the background. This was what mattered. Emily. Their time together. "I'm glad I'm here too," Mark replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I'll always be here, Emily. I promise." And in that moment, Mark realized something that he had never truly understood before. Family wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about doing everything right. It was about love, about effort, about being there even when it was hard. He didn't have all the answers. He didn't know what the future held. But he knew one thing for sure, he would keep showing up. And that was enough. For Emily. For him. For their future together.
The city buzzed with its usual energy as the millionaire strode down the sidewalk, his polished leather shoes clicking against the pavement. His driver stood by the open door of the sleek, black limousine, waiting patiently. The man checked his watch, the faint furrow in his brow betraying his impatience. His schedule was packed, as always, meetings, calls, deals. Time was money, and he had no intention of wasting either. But just as he reached for the handle of the car door, a small figure stepped in front of him. He stopped abruptly, startled by the unexpected interruption. A young black girl, no older than 9 or 10, stood there, her stance firm and defiant. She wore a bright yellow jacket that seemed to glow against the dull backdrop of the city street. Her braids were tied neatly with colorful beads that clicked softly as she tilted her head upward to meet his gaze. "You can't get in," she said, her voice calm but resolute. The millionaire blinked, unsure if he had heard her correctly. He glanced at his driver, who looked just as puzzled, then back at the girl. "Excuse me," he said, his voice sharper than intended. "This car isn't safe," she said, not moving an inch. He frowned, his patience thinning. "Listen, I don't know who you are or what you're doing here, but I don't have time for games. Step aside." The girl didn't budge. Her eyes, dark and steady, bore into his, unflinching. "Please," she said softly, but with an urgency that made him pause. "Just listen to me. You can't get in that car." For a moment, the millionaire considered brushing past her. After all, she was just a child. What could she possibly know about his car, his life, his world? But there was something in her tone, a gravity that didn't belong in the voice of someone so young. It stopped him in his tracks, a feeling he couldn't quite place settling over him. "What's this about?" he asked, folding his arms. "If you're trying to sell me something, this is a very poor strategy." The girl shook her head. "I'm not selling anything. I'm trying to help you." He glanced around, noting that a few passers-by had started to slow, their curiosity piqued by the unusual scene. His instinct was to dismiss her, to reclaim control of the situation and move on with his day. But her unwavering gaze held him in place. "Help me with what?" he asked, his voice laced with skepticism. "I can't say it here," she replied, lowering her voice and glancing nervously at the people around them. "But if you let me, I'll explain." The girl's unwavering gaze never faltered, even as the tension between them thickened. Around them, the city carried on as usual, taxi horns blaring, pedestrians shuffling past, but the millionaire felt as if everything had gone silent. Her words still hung in the air, impossible to ignore. "All right," he said at last, his tone cautious. "Let's talk. But not here." The girl nodded, as if she had expected this response. Without another word, she turned and led him a few steps away from the limousine, weaving through parked cars until they reached a quieter, shaded corner of the street. She glanced over her shoulder to make sure no one was following before stopping. Her composure surprised him. For someone so young, she carried herself with a confidence that felt entirely out of place. It wasn't arrogance, it was urgency, a kind of resolve that made him curious despite his initial irritation. "Okay," he said, crossing his arms. "We're alone. Start talking." The girl hesitated for a moment, as though weighing her words. Then, taking a deep breath, she stepped closer and lowered her voice. "There's a bomb in your car," she said, her tone firm but quiet. He blinked, stunned by the simplicity and weight of her statement. "What?" he asked, his voice sharp. "A bomb? Are you serious?" "Yes," she replied, meeting his incredulous gaze. I saw someone put it there. Her words sent a chill through him, but skepticism quickly took over. And you just happened to see this, did you? He asked, his tone laced with disbelief. A little girl, wandering around and spotting bombs? The girl's face didn't waver. I was in the alley over there, she said, pointing to a narrow passageway that led to the main street. I saw a woman put something under your car. She was acting strange, looking around like she didn't want to be seen. The millionaire followed her gesture, his eyes narrowing as he tried to process her story. And you're sure about this? He pressed. It couldn't have been. I don't know, a maintenance worker or someone unloading equipment. I know what I saw, she said firmly. And I knew I had to warn you. He studied her closely, searching for any sign of deceit. But her expression remained steady, her eyes clear and direct. If she was lying, she was an exceptional actor. But if she was telling the truth? Do you have any proof? He asked, still hesitant to believe her. No, she admitted, her voice softening. But if you don't check, and I'm right, what happens then? Her question hit him harder than he expected. He glanced back toward the limousine, its sleek frame glinting in the sunlight. The driver stood by the open door, waiting patiently, completely unaware of the growing tension nearby. The girl took a small step closer, her voice lowering even further. I don't know who that woman was, but she didn't look like she belonged there. And when I saw her leave, I couldn't just walk away. Her words stirred something in him. It wasn't just her seriousness that caught his attention, it was her bravery. She had no reason to intervene, no obligation to warn him, yet here she was, putting herself in an uncomfortable position for the sake of a stranger. I need you to trust me, she said quietly. Just enough to check. He hesitated, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. Logic told him to dismiss her, to treat this as the rambling of an over-imaginative child. But something deeper, a nagging instinct, told him otherwise. Finally, he exhaled and nodded. Fine, he said. We'll check. But if this turns out to be a prank? It's not, she interrupted, her tone unwavering. You'll see. The millionaire stepped back into the sunlight, motioning for his driver to join them. Pop the hood and check the undercarriage, he instructed. The driver frowned but obeyed, retrieving a flashlight from the car. As the man knelt to inspect the vehicle, the millionaire glanced back at the girl. She stood quietly, her hands clasped in front of her, watching with an intensity that sent another chill through him. He still wasn't sure what to make of her, but one thing was clear, this encounter was far from over. The driver's flashlight beam swept under the sleek, polished frame of the limousine as he crouched to inspect the vehicle. The millionaire stood nearby, arms crossed, his gaze darting between the young girl and his driver. The tension was palpable, each second stretching unbearably long. This is absurd, he muttered, shaking his head. A bomb? Do you realize how ridiculous this sounds? The girl stood firm, her small frame seemingly immovable. I wouldn't have stopped you if I wasn't sure, she said, her voice calm but insistent. The driver straightened, brushing off his knees. Nothing here, he said, his tone dismissive. Just as I thought. Sir, maybe she's just confused. The millionaire exhaled sharply, ready to end this strange interaction, but the girl stepped forward. You're looking in the wrong place, she said, pointing toward the rear of the car. It's under the trunk, near the wheel well. She hid it there. The specificity of her claim made him pause. He hesitated, then motioned for the driver to check again. With an audible sigh, the driver moved to the spot the girl indicated, crouching once more. This time, after a moment of silence, the beam of his flashlight froze. Sir, the driver said, his voice uneasy. There's something here. It's not part of the car. The millionaire's stomach dropped. He stepped closer, peering down as the driver carefully pulled out a small, black device. Wires protruded from it, and a blinking red light pulsed ominously. "What the?" he began, his voice trailing off as his mind raced. "You see," the girl said, her voice cutting through the rising panic. "I told you." The driver carefully placed the device on the ground, backing away as he pulled out his phone to call the police. Meanwhile, the millionaire turned to the girl, his expression a mix of shock and suspicion. "How did you know about this?" he demanded. "And who's she? Who are you talking about?" The girl's confident demeanor wavered slightly, but she held his gaze. "I saw her," she said. "A woman. She's the one who put it there." "What woman?" he pressed, his voice rising. "You need to give me more than that." The girl hesitated, glancing at the device on the ground before meeting his eyes again. "She looked like she knew you. Like she belonged. I didn't think much of it until I saw her hide that under your car." The millionaire's chest tightened as a sickening thought crossed his mind. "What did she look like?" he asked, his voice low. The girl hesitated again, then described the woman in detail, her clothes, her hair, even the expensive bag she carried. Every word chipped away at his disbelief, because the image she painted was unmistakable. It was his wife. He staggered back a step, his mind reeling. It couldn't be true. It had to be a mistake. His wife had no reason to do something so unthinkable. And yet, the girl's description was too precise to ignore. "You're lying," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "You must be lying. How could you possibly know it was her?" "I'm not lying," the girl said firmly. "I saw her with my own eyes. She looked around to make sure no one was watching, but she didn't see me." He turned away, running a hand through his hair as his thoughts spiraled. The idea that his wife, someone he had trusted implicitly, could be involved in something so heinous was almost too much to process. But the evidence was literally at his feet, blinking with every passing second. When the police arrived, their efficient and calm demeanor only amplified the surreal nature of the moment. They carefully removed the device, confirming it was an active explosive. The officers asked questions, but the millionaire's responses were disjointed, his mind still grappling with the possibility of betrayal. The girl, however, answered clearly and directly, recounting what she had seen. The officers listened intently, their expressions growing more serious with every detail she shared. When they asked for the identity of the woman she described, the girl glanced nervously at the millionaire. "She said it was your wife," one officer relayed cautiously. The man's face hardened. His disbelief wavered, replaced by a growing resolve to uncover the truth. Whether it was a mistake, a misunderstanding, or the unthinkable reality, he knew he couldn't ignore this any longer. He needed answers, and he was determined to get them. The limousine pulled up to the circular driveway of the millionaire's estate, its headlights casting long shadows against the sprawling facade of the house. He stepped out, his mind still reeling from the events of the day. The encounter with the girl, the bomb, the police, it all felt surreal, like a scene ripped from a movie. But this was no fiction. The blinking device, the precise description of his wife, it had all been real. Inside, the house was warm and welcoming, a stark contrast to the icy suspicion gnawing at his chest. His wife, dressed in an elegant cream sweater and gold jewelry, was seated on the couch, a glass of wine in her hand. She looked up as he entered, her face lighting up with a smile that froze when she saw the storm in his eyes. "You're home late," she said, her voice cautious. "Is everything okay?" He didn't answer immediately, his footsteps echoing as he crossed the marble floor. "We need to talk," he said finally, his tone clipped. She set down her glass, frowning. "What's going on?" He hesitated, the words catching in his throat. This was the woman he had shared his life with, someone he had trusted implicitly. Accusing her felt like walking a tightrope over a chasm. But the memory of the girl's calm, unwavering voice pushed him forward. "There was a bomb in my car today," he said, watching her reaction carefully. Her eyes widened in shock. "What? A bomb? Are you okay?" "I'm fine," he said, his voice sharp. "Thanks to a little girl who warned me. She saw someone plant it." She leaned forward, her expression a mixture of concern and confusion. "Who would do something like that?" "That's what I want to know," he said, his voice rising. "Because she described the person who planted it. And the description matches you." The room fell silent, the weight of his accusation hanging in the air. His wife stared at him, her face unreadable for a moment before her expression hardened. "Are you serious?" she asked, her voice low and dangerous. "You think I would plant a bomb in your car?" "I don't know what to think," he admitted, pacing the room. "But she was very specific. She described your hair, your clothes, even the bag you carry. How else would she know all that?" His wife stood, her posture rigid with indignation. "You're taking the word of a stranger? A child? Over your own wife?" "She wasn't just guessing," he said, turning to face her. "She knew things she couldn't have made up." "Or maybe she did," his wife snapped, her voice trembling with anger. "Did you even think about that? She probably made up the whole story to get something out of you." "Like what?" he asked, incredulous. "Money," she shot back. "She's probably poor, desperate. And she saw you, rich, vulnerable, an easy target." The accusation hit him like a slap. The girl had been calm, steady, and resolute. Not once had she asked for anything, not money, not attention, nothing. And yet, his wife's words planted a seed of doubt, forcing him to consider a possibility he hadn't before. "She didn't ask for money," he said finally. "She didn't ask for anything." "Not yet," his wife countered. "But she will. Mark my words." He stared at her, his mind spinning. The certainty in her voice was unnerving, but something about her reaction felt off. She was too defensive, too quick to deflect the blame. "I don't know what's going on," he said, his voice quieter now, "but I need to figure it out. Because if you had nothing to do with this, then someone else is trying to destroy me. And if you did—" "Don't even finish that sentence," she interrupted, her eyes flashing. "You'll regret it." The threat hung in the air like a storm cloud, and for the first time in their marriage, he felt a fracture he wasn't sure could be repaired. He left the room without another word, retreating to his study to think. The girl's words, his wife's reaction, the bomb, all of it swirled together in his mind, an unrelenting storm of suspicion and doubt. As he sat in the quiet, the memory of the girl's steady voice surfaced again. "I knew I had to warn you," she had said. The certainty in her eyes had been undeniable. Whatever the truth was, he had to find it. And he wasn't sure if he was more terrified of proving the girl right, or his wife wrong. The quiet of his study did little to settle his racing thoughts. The millionaire sat in his leather armchair, his elbows resting on the mahogany desk, hands clasped tightly together. The soft ticking of the antique clock on the wall seemed louder than ever, each second dragging him deeper into the mire of uncertainty. The events of the day played over and over in his mind like a relentless loop. The girl's words had been clear and confident, her description unervingly precise. But his wife's accusations now echoed in his head. "She's just trying to deceive you for money." It seemed implausible, yet plausible enough to give him pause. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling, wondering how a simple day had unraveled into chaos. His thoughts drifted to the girl's appearance, her bright yellow jacket, the colorful beads in her braids, her small, defiant figure standing firm in front of the limousine. He tried to remember her expression, steadfast, but not angry, serious, but not hostile. Could someone so young and composed really concoct a scheme like this? Or was she, as his wife suggested, driven by desperation, her boldness born of need? The question lingered, and with it came another, darker one, would I be doubting her if she weren't black? He stiffened at the thought, an uneasy knot forming in his stomach. It wasn't a question he wanted to face, but it refused to go away. He prided himself on fairness, on treating people as individuals, yet here he was, questioning this girl's motives simply because of where she came from, because of how she looked. Memories of the girl's steady gaze resurfaced. There had been no fear in her eyes, no hesitation. She hadn't asked for money, hadn't even hinted at it. All she had done was warn him, risking disbelief, ridicule, or worse. She could have walked away, left him to his fate, but she hadn't. And yet, his mind clung to the narrative his wife had suggested. She's poor. She saw an opportunity. He rubbed his temples, trying to shake the thought. Wasn't it easier to believe that? To think the girl had ulterior motives rather than accept the far more uncomfortable truth, that someone close to him, someone he loved and trusted, might have tried to kill him? The possibility that prejudice might be clouding his judgment was a bitter pill to swallow, but it was one he couldn't ignore. He rose from his chair and began pacing the room, the thick carpet muffling his footsteps. He thought about his interactions with people like the girl, those who came from neighborhoods far removed from his own. How often had he dismissed their struggles as something abstract, far away from his world? How many times had he assumed their actions were driven by ulterior motives rather than genuine intent? He paused by the window, looking out over the manicured gardens of his estate. They seemed so pristine, so detached from reality. The girl's world was likely far messier, filled with struggles he couldn't begin to comprehend. But that didn't make her less truthful, or less courageous. His phone buzzed on the desk, jolting him from his thoughts. It was a text from his lawyer, confirming that the police were reviewing the footage from the security cameras near where the bomb had been planted. His stomach twisted at the thought of what they might find. The answer was coming, and he wasn't sure if he wanted it. As he picked up the phone, his mind wandered back to the girl. He realized that his doubt in her wasn't just about her story, it was about his own insecurities. If she was right, it would mean admitting that he had overlooked something vital, something that could have cost him his life. And if she was wrong, it would mean he had allowed his own biases to cloud his judgment. The realization hit him like a blow. This wasn't just about the girl or his wife or the bomb. It was about him, his assumptions, his prejudices, his blind spots. And for the first time in years, he felt the ground beneath him shift, forcing him to confront the uncomfortable truths he had long avoided. The clock ticked on, the silence of the room now charged with the weight of his thoughts. He didn't have the answers yet, but one thing was clear, this wasn't just about finding out who planted the bomb. It was about finding out who he really was. The following morning, the millionaire returned to the scene, his mind a storm of conflicting emotions. The black limousine, once a symbol of his untouchable success, now felt tainted, a reminder of the life-threatening revelation that had unraveled the day before. The street where the bomb had been discovered was quieter now, the chaos of the previous day replaced with an eerie stillness. He had come here for answers. The police had mentioned a security camera positioned on the corner of a nearby building, angled just right to capture activity near the limousine. He needed to see the footage, to confirm what the girl had claimed, or to uncover the lie he feared. The camera belonged to a small convenience store, its modest exterior faded by years of sun and weather. The store owner, a man in his 60s with a kind face, greeted him cautiously. News of the incident had spread quickly, and it was clear the owner recognized the millionaire. "You're here about the footage?" the man asked, his voice gruff but polite. The millionaire nodded. "Yes. The police mentioned your camera might have caught something. I need to see it." The owner gestured for him to follow, leading him into a cramped back room filled with shelves of paperwork and a small desk cluttered with old electronics. At the center was a monitor connected to the security system. The man clicked through the files until he found the timestamp for the day before. The footage played in black and white, the grainy quality a reminder of the camera's age. The millionaire leaned forward, his breath catching as the scene unfolded. The limousine was parked on the curb, the driver momentarily absent. The area seemed quiet, until a figure stepped into view. The girl's description had been hauntingly accurate. The woman who appeared on screen wore a tailored jacket, her hair pulled back neatly, and carried a designer handbag he knew all too well. His wife. He watched, his body tense, as she glanced around the street, her movements quick but deliberate. She knelt near the back of the limousine, reaching into her bag to retrieve a small object. Though the image wasn't perfectly clear, there was no mistaking the shape of the device she placed under the car. His stomach turned as he watched her stand, smoothing her jacket before walking away without a hint of hesitation. The casual confidence of her actions chilled him to the core. This wasn't an impulsive mistake, it was calculated, planned. The store owner cleared his throat, breaking the heavy silence. "Looks like you've got what you need," he said quietly. The millionaire nodded, his jaw clenched. "Can I get a copy of this footage?" "Already sent it to the police," the man replied. "But I can give you a copy too." "Thank you," the millionaire said, his voice hollow. He left the store with the USB drive in hand, the weight of what he had seen pressing down on him like a stone. As he sat in the back of a different car, a sedan the driver had arranged as a temporary replacement, his mind raced. The girl's story had been true all along. She had risked her safety and credibility to save him, while the person he had trusted most had orchestrated his potential demise. The realization brought a mix of gratitude and guilt. He had doubted the girl, let his own biases and fears cloud his judgment. Yet she had stood firm, her courage and clarity cutting through his disbelief. He pulled out his phone and called his lawyer. "I need to speak to the police," he said, his voice steady. "And I need to handle this, delicately." By the time he arrived home, the house felt colder, emptier. He replayed the footage in his mind, his wife's actions looping like a nightmare he couldn't escape. The confrontation ahead would be one of the most difficult of his life, but it was necessary. Before stepping inside, he paused, staring at the USB drive in his hand. He owed the girl more than his gratitude. She had done what no one else could, she had saved his life and exposed the truth. And now, armed with irrefutable evidence, he would make sure justice was served. The mansion felt unnervingly quiet as the millionaire stepped inside, the USB drive tucked securely in his jacket pocket. Every sound, his footsteps against the marble floor, the faint hum of the air conditioning, seemed amplified in the stillness. He paused in the grand entryway, glancing toward the living room where his wife was seated, her profile illuminated by the soft glow of the afternoon sun. She looked poised and serene, a picture of composure as she flipped through a magazine. But the image, once comforting, now felt like a veneer, fragile and deceptive. He took a deep breath, steadying himself for what he was about to do. "Darling," he called, his voice sharp enough to make her glance up. She smiled, though there was a flicker of something else in her eyes, concern, or perhaps calculation. "You're back early. Did you figure out what happened with the car?" "I did," he said, his tone measured. "We need to talk." She set the magazine aside and gestured for him to sit beside her. "Of course. What's wrong?" He didn't sit. Instead, he remained standing, pulling the USB drive from his pocket and holding it up. "This," he said, "is security footage from the scene where the bomb was found." Her smile faltered slightly, but she recovered quickly. "I see," she said, tilting her head. "And what does it show?" "It shows you," he said, each word deliberate and heavy. "Placing the bomb under my car." Her reaction was subtle, but he caught it, the slightest tightening of her jaw, the way her fingers curled into her lap. Still, she didn't break character. That's ridiculous, she said with a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. You can't seriously think I'd do something like that. I don't think, he replied. I know. I've seen the footage. The police have too. Her mask slipped slightly, her expression hardening. And you believe them? You're going to take the word of some grainy camera footage over your own wife? The footage isn't grainy, he shot back. It's clear. Crystal clear. You were caught in the act. She stood then, the composure she had clung to fracturing. Do you even hear yourself? She said, her voice rising. This is absurd. You're accusing me of trying to kill you? Your own wife? Why on earth would I do that? That's exactly what I want to know, he said, his voice like steel. Why? What could possibly justify this? For a moment, he thought she might deny it again, continue the charade. But then her expression shifted, the facade crumbling. She looked at him with an intensity that was almost feral, her carefully curated demeanor giving way to something darker. Because I'm done being invisible, she spat, her voice low and venomous. I'm done living in your shadow, treated like an accessory while you bask in your success. Her words stunned him. Of all the motives he had imagined, greed, revenge, even blackmail, this was one he hadn't anticipated. What are you talking about? He asked, his voice quiet but sharp. You think your life is perfect, she continued, her tone dripping with bitterness. You think this mansion, the cars, the endless parties, you think that's enough. But do you even know what it's like? To be ignored? To be reduced to the woman on your arm, smiling for photos while you reap all the rewards? He stared at her, the depth of her resentment hitting him like a blow. So you tried to kill me, he said, incredulous. That was your solution? I didn't want to kill you, she snapped. I wanted to scare you. To make you realize how fragile your little empire is. To make you see me. Her admission was as chilling as it was infuriating. He shook his head, disbelief etched into his features. You risked my life, and the lives of everyone around me, for that? To make a point? She opened her mouth to respond but stopped when the sound of a car pulling into the driveway broke the tense silence. He glanced toward the window, his jaw tightening. That'll be the police, he said. They're here to take your statement. Panic flashed across her face for the first time. You don't have to do this, she said, stepping toward him. We can fix this. No one else has to know. He stepped back, his resolve unshaken. It's too late for that. You crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. As the front door opened and uniformed officers entered, she turned to him one last time, her expression a mix of anger and desperation. You'll regret this, she said. You'll see. But as she was led away, her words rang hollow. For the first time in days, he felt a sense of clarity, even as the enormity of what had happened began to sink in. The woman he thought he knew had betrayed him in the most unimaginable way. And yet, it wasn't her actions that stayed with him, it was the courage of the girl who had saved him from them. He walked to his desk, pulling out the card the police had given him with the girl's contact information. He owed her more than he could ever repay. But he would start by trying. The next morning, the weight of the previous day's confrontation still hung heavy in the air. The millionaire sat at his desk, his phone in hand, the USB drive containing the damning footage resting next to his laptop. The police had left late the night before, taking his wife into custody for questioning. But even with her gone, the house felt colder, emptier, a reflection of the betrayal that had unraveled his life. He glanced at the business card the officers had left, their instructions clear. Asterisk, if you need anything else, call us immediately. Asterisk, he dialed the number, his fingers unsteady, and after a few rings, a calm, professional voice answered. This is Detective Marks, the voice said. This is, he paused, suddenly aware of how surreal his situation sounded, the victim in the limousine case. "I have the footage you need. It proves everything." The detective listened intently as the millionaire explained what he had seen on the security footage and his wife's subsequent confession. "We'll send a team to collect the evidence," Mark said. "And sir, I understand how difficult this must be. But you've done the right thing." After the call ended, he leaned back in his chair, staring at the USB drive. The truth had been exposed, and justice was in motion, but the sense of relief he expected never came. Instead, his thoughts drifted to the young girl who had been the catalyst for all of this. Without her, he wouldn't be alive to hand over the evidence. He reached for the second card on his desk, this one given to him by the officer who had spoken with the girl. It contained her name and the contact information for her family. He hesitated briefly before dialing, unsure of what to say but knowing he had to say something. The girl's mother answered, her voice cautious. "Hello? This is," he introduced himself, unsure if she recognized his name. "I'm the man your daughter helped yesterday. I just wanted to say, thank you. Her actions saved my life." There was a pause on the other end, followed by a deep sigh of relief. "We weren't sure if you'd believe her," the mother admitted. "When she told me what she'd done, I was proud, but I was scared too. Not everyone would take her seriously." "I almost didn't," he confessed, his voice heavy with guilt. "But she didn't give up. She risked everything to make sure I listened." The woman called for her daughter, and soon, the girl's voice came through the line, soft and hesitant. "Hello? Hi," he said, his tone gentle. "I just spoke with your mother, but I wanted to thank you myself. What you did yesterday, it was brave. Braver than anything I've seen in a long time." There was a pause, and then she said, "I didn't want anything bad to happen. I just did what I thought was right." "You did more than that," he said firmly. "You saved my life. And because of you, the person responsible will face justice." The girl's voice brightened slightly, though it still held the quiet humility he had noticed the day before. "I'm glad you're okay." "I owe you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "More than I can ever repay. But I'd like to try. If there's anything you or your family need." Her mother interrupted gently. "We're just glad she could help. But thank you. That means a lot." After the call ended, the millionaire sat in silence, reflecting on how much his perspective had shifted. The girl's courage had not only saved him but also forced him to confront his own biases and assumptions. He realized now how easy it had been to dismiss someone like her, to assume her motives were anything but genuine. Yet, she had proven to be everything he wasn't in that moment: selfless, fearless, and steadfast. He called his assistant, issuing clear instructions. "I want to set up a scholarship fund for her," he said. "And I want to meet with her family. Whatever they need, I'll make sure they have it." The assistant hesitated. "That's incredibly generous, sir." "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything," he said. "This isn't just about gratitude. It's about doing what's right." As the day unfolded, the wheels of justice continued to turn. The police collected the evidence, and the case against his wife solidified. But for the millionaire, the most significant change wasn't in the resolution of the crime, it was in the way he saw the world and his role in it. That evening, as he sat alone in the grand dining room, he thought of the girl and the immense risk she had taken to save a man she didn't even know. For the first time in years, he felt a flicker of hope, not just for himself, but for the possibility of a better future, one where courage and kindness could truly make a difference. The following weeks brought a whirlwind of changes to the millionaire's life. His days, once consumed by endless meetings and the pursuit of more wealth, now felt different. The events surrounding the bomb plot had shaken him to his core, but it wasn't the betrayal by his wife that lingered most in his mind, it was the courage of the young girl who had saved him. Sitting in his study one morning, he reviewed the details his assistant had gathered about her family. They lived in a modest neighborhood on the edge of the city. Her mother worked 2 jobs to make ends meet, while her father had been laid off months earlier. Despite their struggles, the girl's determination and clarity had been unwavering. She hadn't hesitated to step into danger to save him. Now, he felt compelled to do something more than simply say thank you. He arranged for a meeting with her family. When he arrived at their small but tidy home, he felt a pang of discomfort. It was a world far removed from his sprawling estate. Yet, as the door opened and the girl greeted him with a shy smile, he felt a sense of warmth he hadn't expected. Her mother welcomed him inside, her voice tinged with nervousness. "We weren't sure what to expect," she admitted as they sat in the cozy living room. The girl perched on the arm of the couch, her braids neatly tied with colorful beads, just as they had been that fateful day. The millionaire began to speak, his tone earnest. "What your daughter did, it saved my life. I can't thank her enough, but I want to do something meaningful. I want to make sure she has every opportunity to succeed." Her mother hesitated, her pride and practicality wrestling within her. "We're just glad she could help," she said softly. "That's enough for us." "It's not enough for me," he replied firmly. "She has a bright future ahead of her, and I want to help make sure nothing stands in her way." He outlined his plans: a scholarship fund in her name, ensuring she could attend any school or university she chose. Additionally, he offered to help her parents stabilize their finances, including arranging for her father to interview for a position at one of his companies. The girl's mother looked overwhelmed, her eyes brimming with tears. "This is more than we ever imagined," she said, her voice breaking. "Thank you." The girl, who had been quietly listening, finally spoke. "I don't know what to say," she admitted, her voice small but sincere. "I just wanted to do the right thing." "You did," the millionaire said, leaning forward. "And now it's my turn." The changes didn't stop there. Inspired by the encounter, the millionaire began re-evaluating his role in the community. He realized how insulated his life had been, how often he had overlooked the struggles of those less fortunate. Using his wealth and influence, he launched initiatives to support underprivileged neighborhoods, focusing on education, housing, and job opportunities. The girl's story became the centerpiece of his efforts, a testament to the power of courage and kindness. He invited her family to attend events where she shared her experience, inspiring others to stand up for what's right, no matter the odds. One evening, as he walked through the now vibrant community center he had helped fund, he saw the girl leading a group of younger children in a reading circle. Her laughter filled the room, her confidence shining brighter than ever. Watching her, he felt a sense of purpose he had never known before. For the first time, his wealth felt truly meaningful. As he left the center, a reporter approached him, asking why he had invested so much in this cause. He smiled and simply said, "Because one small act of courage changed my life. Now, I'm just trying to pay it forward." How did this story resonate with you? Have you ever experienced a moment that changed your perspective on life? Share your thoughts in the comments, we'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories of hope, courage, and transformation. Together, we can make a difference.